So I lightly resketched this drawing that I made in elementary or middle school, and I looked for the reference that I used, and I found this Parisian magazine cover, and I don't think it's the one I was looking at, but it's close enough. My original drawing has a lot of lines, which is a common mistake that people make. I'm going to erase them and I'm going to create shadows instead. I'm going to use my blending stump to soften the shadows and to blend into her skin. There's a lot of white space here, which is also a common mistake. The entire face should have some type of shading. Now I'm going to work on the eye. People tend to leave the whites of the eyes completely white without adding any shadow. They also tend to make the iris one value instead of adding a variation of values. The top of the iris and pupil should be darker because the lid is casting a shadow onto the eye, and the values in the iris should vary because it's reflecting whatever the eye is looking at. Now I'm going to be careful not to start my row of bottom lashes right under the eyeball. I have to leave a little space for the bottom eyelid, which people tend to forget about. I'm shading the bottom lid, and I have to be careful not to make it too dark because then it'll look like a wrinkle. I'm shading her skin again, and right at the edge of her face appears a little bit darker because of the shadows. Now I'm going to make the line at the edge of her face disappear by darkening her hair around her face. So we eventually want to get rid of all of these outlines and be left with only contrasting values. The mistake I made in my original drawing is that I tried to draw every strand of hair, and that's a big mistake. Now I'm going to work on the nose. Her nostrils have a little bit more of a box shape, so I'm going to adjust that. My original drawing had a little bit more of a round shape. I'm also going to add a little shadow under there and a little more to her cheeks to make them pop out a little bit more. My eyebrows weren't bad, but I'm going to bring them down just a little bit. I'll add a little bang and touch up a little around her face before I go to her mouth. My original mouth wasn't terrible, but I'm going to adjust the shape just a little bit, make it a little more straight across on the top, and pay attention to how the edge of her mouth lines up with the rest of her features. I'm very proud that in my original drawing I did not make the common mistake of making dark lines to separate each of her teeth. I kept it very light. Now I'm going to add a little contrast to her mouth, and I'll just put a little gray where her gums are and where her top row of teeth are casting a shadow onto her bottom row. Every time I work on one of her facial features, I always go back to the skin because that is just as important. Now I'm going to go to the other side and work on it for a little bit so that it looks like the first side I did. I'm making sure to keep my eyes on the reference most of the time because even though her face is symmetrical, each side is just a little unique from the other. I'm drawing the large curls in her hair as opposed to each individual strand. Now it's time to get comfortable and nitpick. I'm simply deciding which areas need a little bit more contrast. That's the difference between the light and the dark areas. And in certain places, we should have very strong contrast to make her a little bit more three-dimensional.